been given the green light by President Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, the Special Investigating Unit report into PPE corruption reveals that more than half of the contracts were awarded irregularly. The rand value in cash and assets to be recovered is estimated to be around 551.5 million rand, just about R500 million rand, to make it more simpler. For more on this, just to get some insights, let's talk to Professor Alex van der Heever, public health expert at Wits School of Governance. Prof, thank you very much for your time and particularly your patience while we were live there in Yaoundé in Cameroon, listening to the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, after that footballing tragedy that happened last night. Now, on the score of the SIU report, first question I just wanted to ask you, I think, is it a good thing that at least the president has allowed this information now to go public? I mean, it's a lot of information, but the fact that it's been released to the public, isn't that good for transparency at least?
I think it is. It is, as part of an accountability process, transparency is quite crucial. We do see similar kinds of information produced by the Auditor General. But another part of the accountability process are the consequences that flow from this information. So we've got one part which is very good, and I think that it's very good that the president is, taking leadership in making sure that this is out there, even if it's potentially harmful to the perception of his government and his party. But it is quite clear from the report that essentially the party and the government have a lot to answer for. But this is the way, firstly, government should be functioning. But we still have to get to the consequences part, which I'm afraid is not terribly clear at this point. And some of the figures and the distribution of potential corruption, in this case between provinces, raises a lot of question marks about what's been going on.
Yeah, I mean, I see there's been some referrals, according to the statement from the president on this, saying that the SIU has made 386 referrals, I don't know what that means, to the National Prosecuting Authority, as well as 3 referrals for executive action. One would presume that the SIU has asked the NPA maybe to formulate charges. I mean, that's quite a big chunk of these numbers that were investigated. If that happens, that would be good for consequence.
That would be good. So there's sort of 3 categories that they've got. The referrals to the NPA, which would be one, which is criminal prosecutions. The other are referrals for disciplinary action within the state itself. And what we're seeing in some cases is that the state is incredibly slow to even take the disciplinary action. That involves potentially reprimanding or firing people who were part of this process in government. And the third, for executive action, is essentially to tell the president, this is a minister who's compromised and possibly needs to go. So that is for instance, what happened with William Keyser. So the executive action is also very important for that branch of government. So we do need, those are lesser in terms of impact on those individuals than, for instance, the criminal prosecutions. But what would concern me if we had to look at the digital vibes situation is that the recommendations for disciplinary action have not made any difference in that department. Some of the people who were implicated in the SIU report, in which it details what they've done, there's been no disciplinary action. There's been the DG that has been kind of let off the hook, but the DDG responsible for the tender process is, for all intents and purposes, still receiving a salary months after the SIU report was made available to the Minister of Health and the Department of Health. So I think that this is the thing that we need to follow. So we do need to have a report on actually what happens in all of these cases. It includes that the money that must be recovered, and the money that's been recovered so far is only a small proportion of the 14 billion rand that was under investigation. And it's worth noting that around about 40% by value of money was from the Gauteng province. 40% of that overall 14 billion rand was from one province alone, which really raises serious questions about what's going on generally within the provincial administration here. But Eastern Cape and KwaZulu-Natal also provinces that really, if what we're seeing here is a reflection of the general conduct of those departments, it's extremely worrying.
Yeah, I mean, the depth of this, as you're just pointing out in terms of what's coming out of this report. But I just want to stay just one more second, Prof, about the issue of consequence. In the statement by the presidency, it states that they trust the NPA will exercise its discretion diligently and expeditiously. Now, you're making the point earlier that we need to follow. So some of these referrals, those have been made for disciplinary action, for administrative action, but we still see a lag in the implementation of others in the past. What kind of exercise would you expect the NPA to do after, for example, in this particular case, they've got 386 of these cases referred to them, and the presidency wants them to act diligently and expeditiously?
So the NPA will have to formulate criminal cases against those potential individuals. And
Hi, Prof. We lost the Prof. Apologies for that. Prof, we just lost you there as you were answering that last question about the NPA. You can pick it up again.
Yeah, so the NPA has to initiate criminal prosecutions, which means they have to prepare cases and take them to court. The question is whether the SIU has actually passed the particular threshold for investigation that does not require significant further investigation by the SIU itself. In other words, the SIU has essentially done a large part of the work that the Hawks might have had to do, or the investigative units of the NPA itself. If that's the case, the referrals for prosecution could be expeditious, but they are the more onerous part of this particular process, because the referrals for disciplinary action can proceed without further evidence potentially. And what is required there is that those departments then follow proper procedures and take disciplinary action against individuals that are implicated. But we do need to have a report back on what has happened to the individual, who was referred, and what actually happened. The referral for executive action, I would take also extremely seriously, because that implies that a minister is involved or an MEC. And that is really up to a premier or the president to take action. Now, if they don't take action, now, the president has made a sort of a big song and dance about these performance contracts that he's introduced for government, which is part of trying to introduce a degree of accountability and consequences for non-performance. Well, one of the lowest levels of performance is to allow gross misconduct within your department and to be part of it. So if there's one of these referrals for executive action and there's a failure to act, then really we can't trust any of these so-called performance contracts. So we do need to see action on all these three fronts. And the NPA is really a crucial part, because people have to go to jail as part of that process, and we have to have assets recovered. And that's not only people in government, it's people in the private sector who've been part of these processes. Essentially, we need to have all of those people impacted. But I do believe that this is the tip of the iceberg, because what we are seeing in the SIU investigations on in relation to sort of PPE, et cetera, and the COVID response is really the state of the general condition of provincial and national government departments. They were prepped for this. They felt no concern about acting in this way on a sort of pretty much across the board in government. And that means that there's a lot more corruption out there than has been picked up by the SIU in the COVID-related investigations. And when you look at the Auditor General's reports, you see that annually billions of rands worth of irregular expenditure incurred by provincial government departments, and those billions of rands of irregular expenditure are all because tender procedures were not followed. Now, that is a far larger number than what the SIU is reporting here. And I think that this is where we really need to clean up government overall. There's clearly a fundamental problem. And just to note that prosecutions and these referrals for disciplinary action are really how you manage departments and misconduct by exception. But when you see this level of misconduct, it means that there's a general breakdown in the integrity of public services and departments.
And a lot needs to be fixed.
That is really a concern. Yeah, and you can't manage all of that just through prosecutions.
Yeah, no, thank you, Professor. Thanks for your insights and your time. We're going to have to wait and see what the NPA, for example, in this case will do, and what will be these executive actions that will be taken as referred now to the government, and it's now all now public by the Special Investigating Unit, who's done their job. The other arms and need to do their job. That's what the professor is saying. He's, of course, from the Wits School of Governance. Now, if you're